everybody, and welcome back to the Bene channel. Today, I am really excited to have a special guest with us, one of my friends, Bill Wylie-Kellermann. Bill is a retired United Methodist pastor, nonviolent activist, and an author. His most recent book is Celebrant's Flame, Daniel Berrigan in Memory and Reflection. It's excellent. I hope that you all go out and buy it right now or after the interview. Bill, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, Rosie, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So Bill, I read your book and I thought it was just beautiful. Just such a wonderful reflections on Dan Berrigan and on your friendship with him and many other people's. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is that Ched Myers, he likened your book to a family scrapbook. I think that this is great. I was wondering, what was it like writing this book, and what were people's reactions when you asked them to be contributors?
Yeah, this book is very much an active community and family, as you're suggesting. And Ched is part of that family, obviously, himself. So many other folks could have been part of this, and the community that's here represented is really just representing a much wider family. It's not a book that I ever intended. Sometimes I've written some other books, and sometimes you have things on the back burner or in the pipeline or know you need to write. But this one just kind of came, well, it started with an invitation to write something for another project. And to get my juices flowing, I printed out some poems and other things that I'd written about Dan, and suddenly looked at it and was like, gee, are these the bones of a book? And when Cascade, the publisher, said yes, though I was writing on a deadline, it really just kind of poured out of me, something woke up, my dream life and prayer life kind of woke up at the same time. It's really a memoir about my own formation, about family and community, as you say, and not so much driven as summoned or invited by the Spirit, if I can be so bold in that regard. And I'm really grateful to the folks that contributed to it, as you say. Kateri Boucher, who is part of the Catholic worker here, Gen X, well, millennial, it actually started out by being a transcriber for some materials, and very quickly became a kind of a consultant and collaborator. It was only natural that she write afterward. Frida Berrigan was the one who had to think and pray about it a little, only because she gets so many invitations and to projects, and has family and work commitments. But the letter writers, Kathy Kelly, John Bach, Eric Martin, Jim Reale, I was actually in correspondence with them on Dan Matters in other connections, and it was very organic for that to move into asking them to write a letter for the book that could function on a particular aspect of his person. That they were all pleased and excited and very, very generous in contributing.
Well, I loved reading their reflections as well as yours. So I was just so happy with who you got to speak on that and write on that. And I thought that was wonderful. And another thing that I loved in the book is how you noted that Dan read the Bible with, and I'll quote, life and death seriousness. I read about many examples of this in your book. I was wondering if you could give our listeners some examples.
Yeah, I think if I had to write that again, I might say death and life seriousness. Just sort of flip the order because what's really underneath that is the cross and resurrection of Jesus, and I think that's the lens in some ways through which Dan reads the prophets and reads the Bible generally. So, and that's a matter of both taking risks, big risks, and doing so free from the fear of death or the power of death, um, loss of repute, and all the lesser versions of that, loss of repute and personal attacks and imprisonment, obviously, all those things. So you readily think of the big actions like Catonsville and Plowshares 8, where he and others are kind of inventing and defining liturgical direct action, or you could say biblically based nonviolent sabotage. Those are the big ones. But also I've included a speech of his in the book, the entire speech that he gave in the midst of the October Yom Kippur War um, uh, between Israel and the Arab states. And I think of it as a really bold and prophetic statement. He'd been invited to give a speech, and then the war broke out. And so he's giving it in the midst of while the bombs are falling, literally, and he took a lot of heat for that. That was reading the prophets in particular, and Israel's biblical tradition with life and death seriousness that involved risk, literally loss of repute, wards withdrawn, invitations withdrawn, being vilified, heavily in the Jewish community, but in other places as well. So I think of that as part of what it means for him to be reading the Bible with life and death seriousness, and then of course that he's encouraging us all to read with those kind of risks and and willingness to pay the personal price.
Yes, that is amazing. Thank you, Bill. Yes.
I wondered if I could do turnabout and ask you a question here.
Please, please do.
Yeah, I wrote this book. Well, I wrote it for myself on the one hand. I wrote it for friends in a wider community, but I had a particular interest in like a new generation of activists, and we're in the midst of such a resurgence of movement led by young people that I sort of wanted to make him accessible to a new generation, and you're one of those. I don't know whether you're Gen X or millennial, but you're my target audience in some way. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit, having read it, how Dan's life and work, and particularly as represented by the book, impacts you, it touches you.
Yeah. So, of course, thank you for that question. I think a big part of what stands out to me about Dan Berrigan is like how he really took seriously this call to end war and violence. And when I see like people, activists in my generations, a lot of what people are talking about is like we're looking at Greta Thunberg and Emma Gonzalez, and because we are shaken by environmental disasters caused by climate change, and I've had to, and I know many people in my generation have had to participate in so many like shooter drills at school, and we witness racism also and its effects. And so that's really like environmentalism and Black Lives Matter movement and March for Our Lives are a lot of what people in my generation are looking at. But what I love is that Daniel Berrigan prompts us to look at this issue, this greater issue as well of war and violence. And it's very intersectional, because it's all connected. Our war machine is a huge part of, plays a huge role in emissions and in the destruction of our environment. And so many of my classmates haven't heard about what's going on in Yemen. We've heard about Afghanistan, but since there's no draft, as there was, in the 60s, the majority of students don't consider the military, the majority of students that I know don't consider the military as something that they would participate in. And although our nuclear program is like expanding, a lot of young people that I know see that as out of sight, out of mind. And so what I love is that, we do have a concern about issues that are tied up with Dan Berrigan, because as I said earlier, it's all connected. But Dan Berrigan prompts us to look at how this is all connected. So when I share with people about Dan Berrigan and about his life, what I see is like empowerment. And I've seen a lot of people in my generation very, very interested in Thomas Merton. Like there's a class at UK about Thomas Merton at University of Kentucky where I go. And so I am excited to see people, having this interest in not just taking, as important as they are, not just taking the, environmentalism, or just racism, because we need to take environmentalism, racism, the war machine, etc. We need to take it all. And Dan Berrigan is such a light and such a strong example of how to live. And so I love to learn about Dan Berrigan and talk about him. And I love to encourage people to like buy books on him, like your book, because he challenges us as we live, like, in this age. We can gain ideas as we're looking at, how I would say are more recent prophets. Right. So, I want them to know why Daniel Berrigan burned draft files, why he hammered on nuclear warheads. I want them to know that we're supposed to challenge the empire. And so one thing that I found so beautiful in my journey of learning about Daniel Berrigan is how I've been able to be connected with this like peace community. So when I was like a junior in high school, my mom and sister and we went to visit Claire Grady. It was after her Plowshares action, and we went on a hike with her. It was fall, and I remember we sat down and she was telling us all about her Uncle Dan, as she said, and she was telling us about his laughter, his exuberance, his bold and clear ideas. And I've had so many experiences of people telling me about Dan, Liz, Frida, you, Kathy Kelly, John Deere, etc. And I think that the more we talk about Dan Berrigan, the more it shines a light on his life and his message. And I think that it's just so beautiful how y'all have really been able to share it with the younger generation, which I'm so honored to be a part of. So I hope I gave a pretty good answer there, but I would say that I'm I'm hoping that young people will read this book. That's why I wanted to do this interview. And I'm hoping that young people will learn more about Daniel Berrigan. I'm ready to join the Gen Z Daniel Berrigan fan club. I'm ready to join it. I can lead it, whatever. So I hope that his message becomes even.
Those are my hopes as well. And you know, where we've got a generation of young people who are doing these incredible movements,
Yeah.
and yet and feeling like sometimes like they're inventing movement. And I think it's so important to and we've been doing that here in Detroit around Detroit Will Breathe, which is the version of Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And they periodically have history days. They were doing something every day, but they would stop and take a break and have elders come and talk about history. And I think that's such an important conversation to be sort of putting together the reinvention of nonviolence with the history of nonviolence.
Yeah, that's what I loved about Kateri's afterword, is how, she was like, we can, we can look at the past and we can learn things, and then also we can move forward. And it was just, I don't know, I loved her afterword. I felt like it was very in line with what I've seen, and I was just so glad that you were able to get her to write that.
Yeah.
So thank you for that question, Bill. I that was really fun. Thank you. My last question for you is, what does nonviolence mean to you?
Yeah, I think of nonviolence as a discipline and a way of life, but also a force which can be recognized and shaped across a great variety of spiritual traditions. But for me, I guess I want to speak specifically to the way it's rooted in the Jesus tradition. We've already talked a little bit about this in the context of death and resurrection and the cross, taking up your cross, I think has to do with taking the risks for which there are consequences, right? And the way Jesus endures torture and crucifixion, imprisonment, torture, crucifixion, entirely lovingly, and maintaining nonviolence from the beginning through the Sermon on the Mount to the very end, really living and walking in freedom from the fear of death, from the power of death. I do think of nonviolence as a positive force, and like many of us sort of yearn for an English equivalent of satyagraha, truth force. But on the other hand, I'm also convinced that the negative dimension, the no, is actually essential. And I'm among those who link nonviolence, resistance, and community as a kind of nonviolent triplets. Nonviolence is a big yes, but it's inseparable from a no, to violence, to empire, to assault on the planet, to oppression, to disrespect of human beings and creatures of Earth. Nonviolence itself is a kind of double negative, packed into one word. And just to go back to Dan here a little bit and learning from him, he had a proclivity for double negatives. On the stand for the Plowshares 8 action, he said we could not do this, right? which is really a way of talking about the positive pull and demand, the call, even the coercion of the Holy Spirit. He has a long poem, Letter to the Vietnamese Prisoners, which is included in the book. And it shares a line with another long poem of his, also from Dan Berry, called The Risen Tin Can, which is about resurrection. And both poems have this same line. It ends, it's the last line in the Letter to the Vietnamese, which is no to their no, yes to all else. And I think that's a pretty good thumbnail snapshot of, it's nonviolence in a nutshell. No to their no, yes to all else. So that's what I think of nonviolence, or at least the beginnings of what I might say about it.
Wow. Thank you, Bill. I love that. And I loved hearing from you personally about your book. Audience, I hope you guys go out and buy it. I've linked it below. It's beautiful. You will not regret reading it. Thank you so much, Bill, for being here today.
Can I say, I think if people go to my website, which is Bill Wylie-Kellermann, all run together, except Wylie-Kellermann and Kellerman with two N's, MANN.com. I think the 25% coupon, 25% off coupon is still good. I think that would be, and that'll take you back to the Cascade website, but with a coupon number.
Oh, great. Well, there's 25% off. Now you have no excuse to not buy it. I will link that in the description. And thanks so much, Bill. It's been an honor and a joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. I so appreciate you thinking of me and doing this.
Thank you so much.
Yep.